camera shutter clicks somewhere deep along a mountain trail, capturing a moment that seems too ordinary to remember. The path stretches ahead, the weather appears calm, and nothing in the photograph suggests that it will become the last confirmed record of the person standing behind the lens. Yet scattered across forests, deserts, and high mountain ranges are investigations that all return to the same unsettling point: a single image taken before the trail falls silent, leaving behind no witness to what happened next. As you look more closely, those photographs begin to change. Details that once belonged to a holiday snapshot become pieces of evidence measured against maps, weather records, search reports, and eyewitness accounts. Some images narrowed vast search areas, others inspired decades of debate, and many still refuse to answer the simplest question of all. What happened in the moments after the camera captured its final frame? The last photos of David O'Sullivan, the Irish hiker who vanished on the Pacific Crest Trail. Stretching across thousands of miles of mountains, forests, and remote wilderness, the Pacific Crest Trail has long attracted hikers searching for solitude, challenge, and a connection with some of North America's most demanding landscapes. The trail crosses through California, Oregon, and Washington, passing through environments where a single decision can determine whether a journey continues safely or takes an unexpected turn. Every year, hikers set out carrying cameras, maps, and supplies, documenting their progress through photographs that capture the places they reach and the moments they hope to remember. But for one traveller in 2017, the images and records left behind would become part of a search for answers after his journey suddenly came to an end. David O'Sullivan was a 25-year-old Irish hiker who arrived in the United States with the goal of completing the Pacific Crest Trail, one of the longest and most challenging long-distance hiking routes in the country. Like many who attempt the trail, he was drawn by the scale of the adventure and the opportunity to experience landscapes that few people ever fully explore. He began his hike from the southern end of the trail near the Mexican border in California, moving north through a route that would take him through some of the state's most rugged terrain. For those who knew him, O'Sullivan was described as someone who enjoyed the outdoors and embraced the challenges that came with the long-distance hiking. His journey was not simply about reaching a destination, but about experiencing the trail itself, one section at a time. Along the way, like many hikers, he documented parts of his adventure, creating a record of the places he passed through before his progress stopped. The Pacific Crest Trail can appear deceptively peaceful in photographs. A mountain ridge beneath a clear sky, a quiet stretch of forest, or a distant view across the wilderness can make the trail seem almost untouched and inviting. Yet behind those images is an environment that demands preparation and constant awareness. The distance between resupply points can be significant, communication can be unreliable, and many sections of the trail pass through areas where help is not immediately available. In the early months of his hike, O'Sullivan continued making his way along the California section of the trail. His movements brought him through areas where hikers commonly stop to rest, collect supplies, and exchange information with others following the same route. These interactions became important pieces of the timeline later reconstructed by those searching for him. The last confirmed sightings of O'Sullivan placed him near Idlewild, California, in November 2017. According to reports, he had been hiking in the region and was last known to have been in contact with people there before he disappeared. When he failed to continue his journey and did not make contact with family or friends, concern began to grow that something had happened somewhere along the trail. Search efforts began as authorities and volunteers attempted to determine where O'Sullivan's journey had ended. Investigators looked into his known movements, the areas he had travelled through, and any possible clues that could explain his disappearance. But despite searches of the surrounding wilderness, no discovery provided a clear answer about what happened to him. For a missing hiker, the absence of evidence can be one of the most difficult parts of an investigation. In many wilderness disappearances, search teams are working against conditions that constantly change the landscape. Weather can cover tracks, time can erase physical evidence, and vast areas of terrain can make even extensive searches challenging. The wilderness does not preserve a person's final moments in a way that makes the story easy to reconstruct. The photographs and records left behind by hikers like O'Sullivan create a strange connection between a known past and an unknown future. An image can confirm that someone was there, that they reached a certain place and that they were continuing their journey at a particular moment. But after the final record, there is often a gap that investigators cannot easily explain. The camera may capture the trail, but it cannot reveal what happened beyond the frame. In O'Sullivan's case, the unanswered questions remain focused on that missing section of his journey. He was an experienced traveller who had set out to complete a demanding route, yet somewhere along the Pacific Crest Trail his progress stopped. The landscape that had been the setting for his adventure became the location of a mystery that has remained unresolved. Years after his disappearance, David O'Sullivan's case continues to represent one of the difficult realities of wilderness exploration. Even with modern communication, detailed trail systems, and the ability to document a journey through photographs, some disappearances leave behind more questions than answers. The final traces of a person's path can show where they had been, but they cannot always reveal where they went next. And somewhere along the vast wilderness of the Pacific Crest Trail, the final moments of David O'Sullivan's journey remain hidden, leaving behind a mystery that has never been fully explained: the final images of Jerry Largay, the Appalachian Trail disappearance. Beyond the crowded viewpoints and familiar markers of the Appalachian Trail lies a quieter side of the wilderness, where long stretches of forest can separate hikers from the safety of the paths they believe they know. The trail is one of the most famous long-distance hiking routes in the world, attracting thousands of people who attempt to cross its mountains and forests each year, yet parts of it pass through remote regions where a person can quickly become isolated. In northern Maine, where the Appalachian Trail cuts through dense woodland, steep terrain, and areas with limited visibility, even experienced hikers can find themselves facing situations they never expected. It was in this landscape that one hiker's ordinary journey became one of the most discussed disappearances in the history of the trail. Known among fellow hikers as Inchworm, Geraldine Largay entered the Appalachian Trail not as an inexperienced traveller searching for adventure, but as someone who understood the patience and preparation required to move through the wilderness. Jerry, as she was known, was a 66-year-old retired nurse from Tennessee who had spent years developing a love for hiking and the outdoors. In 2013, she was attempting to complete the Appalachian Trail, a challenge that requires endurance, planning, and the ability to adapt to constantly changing conditions. Like many long-distance hikers, Jerry documented parts of her journey along the way. Her photographs captured ordinary moments from the trail, preserving the scenery and experiences that made the adventure meaningful to her. At the time, these images were simply personal records of a long-awaited goal. They showed a person continuing forward, unaware that the moments being recorded would later become part of the effort to understand what happened to her. In early August 2013, Jerry was hiking through the rugged section of the Appalachian Trail in Maine, near the western portion of the state's wilderness. She was traveling with another hiker, and the two had planned to meet later after briefly separating. Jerry's decision to step away from the main route would eventually become the turning point in a case that remained unresolved for years. During the early days of August 2013, a routine section of Jerry Largay's hike through Maine's remote forests slowly transformed from an ordinary challenge into a situation she could not easily escape. While attempting to reconnect with the trail, she became lost. The area where she disappeared was not an unfamiliar wilderness far from civilization, but a section of terrain where thick forest and confusing paths could make navigation extremely difficult. For hikers, becoming temporarily disoriented is not unusual, especially in heavily wooded areas where landmarks can be difficult to identify. However, the difference between being briefly lost and becoming completely separated from a known route can depend on a series of small decisions. In Jerry's case, the situation continued long enough that returning to the trail became increasingly difficult. Among the records left behind from Jerry's journey were photographs that captured fragments of her time on the trail, preserving moments that appeared ordinary before the full meaning of her disappearance became known. These photographs did not reveal a dramatic warning or an obvious sign of danger. Instead, they represented something far more unsettling: evidence of a normal journey that quietly transitioned into an emergency. The photographs connected to Jerry's hike helped establish parts of her timeline and showed her movements before she became lost. They were reminders of where she had been and what she had experienced before the circumstances changed. However, like many final images connected to missing person cases, they could only provide a partial story. They could show a moment, but they could not explain what happened after that moment passed. The uncertainty surrounding Jerry's disappearance deepened because she was not completely without resources. She had hiking equipment, supplies, and a small notebook that would later become one of the most important pieces of evidence in the case. Instead of leaving behind only unanswered questions, Jerry left behind a written account of her experience, creating a rare record of what happened during her final days. Hidden within the uncertainty surrounding Jerry's disappearance was a written account that would later reveal the thoughts, decisions, and struggles of a hiker attempting to survive alone. After investigators eventually discovered her belongings, they found that Jerry had written detailed notes describing her situation. The journal entries revealed that she understood she was lost and attempted to remain hopeful while waiting for help. The writing showed that Jerry had made efforts to survive. She documented her circumstances, recorded her thoughts, and tried to maintain a sense of order despite being separated from the trail. Her notes became one of the most unusual aspects of the case because they provided a direct connection to a person who had disappeared, allowing investigators to reconstruct events that would otherwise have remained unknown. As days turned into weeks, the search for Jerry unfolded across one of Maine's most challenging wilderness regions, where dense forests and difficult terrain complicated every attempt to trace her movements. When she was reported missing, search teams began looking through the area where she was believed to have travelled. The operation involved authorities, volunteers, and experienced search personnel who worked to locate any sign that could lead them to her. The difficulty was not simply the size of the search area. Wilderness searches often depend on knowing exactly where to look, and Jerry's disappearance created a difficult problem because investigators did not know the precise location where she had become separated from the trail. A person can travel a significant distance while trying to find their way back, and every possible direction can create another area that must be examined. Despite extensive efforts, the initial search did not locate Jerry. Time passed, and the lack of answers made the case increasingly difficult for her family and those who had joined the effort to find her. Her disappearance became one of the Appalachian Trail's most haunting mysteries, especially because she had vanished in an area that was not completely unknown or inaccessible. For more than 2 years, the absence of answers surrounding Jerry Largay's disappearance left investigators and her family facing the same unanswered question. How could an experienced hiker vanish so completely? The case remained unresolved while searchers continued to examine possibilities, and investigators attempted to understand what might have happened after her last known movements. The mystery surrounding Jerry's disappearance began to change in October 2015, when a discovery in the Maine woods finally revealed what had happened after the search had long gone cold. A survey crew working in the area discovered human remains, which were later identified as belonging to Jerry. The location was within the general region where she had disappeared, but the discovery raised another difficult question. Why had she remained undiscovered for so long? The recovery of Jerry's remains allowed investigators to understand more about her final days. Her belongings, including her journal, provided information that had not been available during the original search. The evidence suggested that Jerry had survived for an extended period after becoming lost and had remained in the same general area rather than travelling far from where searchers had been looking. With the discovery of her remains and the recovery of her belongings, investigators could finally piece together the timeline hidden within Jerry's photographs, notes, and the landscape where she spent her final days. The case revealed the tragic reality that someone can leave behind significant clues and still remain hidden in a vast wilderness environment. Jerry's journal entries showed that she had attempted to signal for help and had tried to remain alive while waiting to be found. Her photographs and written records created a rare opportunity to understand a missing person's experience from their own perspective. Instead of a disappearance with no explanation, her case became a story built from fragments left behind by the person at the centre of it. The tragedy of Jerry Largay's disappearance was not that she vanished without a trace. In many ways, it was the opposite. She left behind photographs, belongings, and written words that documented her journey and her struggle. Yet those clues were not enough to overcome the challenges of the wilderness and the uncertainty of her location during the search. Her case also changed the way many people viewed wilderness disappearances. It demonstrated that even experienced hikers can encounter situations that become impossible to reverse, and that survival in remote areas depends not only on preparation, but also on circumstances that may be beyond a person's control. Even after the truth of Jerry's disappearance emerged, The story of her final journey remained a haunting reminder of how quickly the wilderness can conceal someone who was never truly far away. The Appalachian Trail had not taken her to an unknown corner of the world, but it had placed her in a landscape where finding one person among countless acres of forest proved extraordinarily difficult. The final images and records left behind by Jerry Largay remain a lasting part of her story, preserving not only the places she visited, but also the final chapter of a journey that continues to raise questions about survival, distance, and the hidden dangers of the wilderness. The photographs of Jerry Largay captured the beginning of a journey she hoped to complete, but they also became part of the evidence surrounding the mystery of how a determined hiker could disappear within the forests of the Appalachian Trail. The last known photos of Everett Roos, the artist who disappeared into the desert. Few young artists of the early 20th century embraced solitude as completely as Everett Roos, a restless traveller whose paintings, writings and photographs recorded a life spent searching for places far beyond the ordinary world. While many people of his generation were moving towards cities, careers and more predictable paths, Everett was drawn toward remote landscapes where he could observe, create and experience places that remained largely untouched by modern life. His journeys were not simply attempts to reach distant locations, they were a personal search for inspiration, independence, and a deeper connection with the natural world. But one journey into the American Southwest would become different from all the others, because it was the last one from which he would never return. Born in 1914 in California, Everett Roos developed an early interest in art and exploration. As a young man, he began travelling through the western United States, carrying supplies for painting, writing and photography as he moved through landscapes that fascinated him. He was known for his independence and his willingness to live with few possessions, often choosing to travel alone and spend extended periods away from conventional society. His approach to exploration was unusual for his time. Everett was not a professional explorer mapping unknown territory, nor was he searching for wealth or recognition. Instead, he travelled as an artist, allowing landscapes, people, and moments of solitude to influence his work. His letters revealed someone deeply connected to the places he visited, often describing the beauty and emotional impact of the wilderness around him. With each journey he completed, Everett became more deeply connected to the landscapes he explored, leaving behind sketches, letters, and photographs that reflected both his artistic vision and his desire for independence. He travelled through areas of California, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah, documenting the places he encountered along the way. His photographs captured ancient rock formations, desert environments, and remote communities, creating a visual record of a young artist determined to experience the American West on his own terms. These journeys also revealed something about Everett's personality. He was fascinated by isolation, but not because he wanted to escape the world completely. Rather, he seemed to find meaning in being surrounded by landscapes that allowed him to think, create, and observe without distraction. The desert was not simply an empty space to him. It was a place filled with history, beauty, and artistic possibility. Captured on film were the quiet moments that defined Everett's travels, images of ancient cliffs, desert valleys, and remote settlements that would later become the final visual record of his known adventures. Unlike photographs from modern missing person cases, Everett's images were not created with technology designed to preserve an exact timeline. They were the work of an artist documenting what interested him, unaware that these photographs would eventually become connected to one of the most enduring mysteries of the American Southwest. The photographs also provide a glimpse into the way Everett experienced the world. They do not simply show where he travelled, they reveal what he noticed. His images focused on landscapes and details that reflected his artistic perspective, preserving places that many people at the time would never have seen. Years later, those photographs became some of the strongest connections to a person whose final journey remains uncertain. During the fall of 1934, Everett once again set out with his artistic supplies and pack animals, travelling into southeastern Utah, where the canyons offered the isolation he had spent years seeking. At the time, he was 20 years old and had already spent years travelling through the Southwest. His destination was the rugged canyon country near the Colorado River, an area known for its dramatic terrain and difficult conditions. Everett travelled with 2 burros, animals that had accompanied him on previous journeys through the West. His plan was similar to his earlier adventures: move through the landscape, create art, and experience the region away from crowded places. He was familiar with travelling independently, and nothing about the beginning of this journey suggested that it would become his final known expedition. But after entering the Utah wilderness, communication with Everett stopped. The last confirmed period of his journey was in November 1934, when he was seen near Davis Gulch in southeastern Utah. After that point, the trail of information became increasingly uncertain. When Everett failed to return from his journey, the uncertainty surrounding his absence grew quickly, especially after evidence of his travels was discovered without any sign of the young artist himself. His burrows were later found abandoned, and some of his belongings were recovered in the area. These discoveries confirmed that Everett had been in the region, but they did not explain what had happened afterward. The disappearance was especially puzzling because Everett was not someone who had simply wandered into the wilderness without experience. He had spent years travelling through challenging environments and understood the difficulties of desert conditions. Yet even knowledge of the landscape could not answer the central question: where had Everett gone? As search parties moved through the rugged country Everett had entered, they faced a difficult task: finding someone who had intentionally chosen places where few people ventured. The terrain of southeastern Utah presented enormous challenges. Deep canyons, isolated waterways, and difficult travel conditions made searching complicated, especially during an era when investigators lacked many of the tools available today. Search efforts continued, but no discovery provided a definitive explanation for Everett's disappearance. Over time, his case attracted attention not only because of the mystery itself, but because of the person at the centre of it. Everett was not remembered simply as a missing traveller. He became associated with the spirit of exploration, creativity, and the search for something beyond ordinary life. Over the decades, researchers, historians, and those fascinated by Everett's story have proposed different explanations for his disappearance, yet the truth has remained beyond confirmation. Some theories suggest that he may have died as a result of an accident in the difficult terrain. Others have suggested that he may have encountered other people during his travels or chosen to leave his previous life behind. However, none of these explanations has been proven. The uncertainty surrounding Everett's fate has allowed speculation to continue, but the documented facts remain limited. He entered the Utah wilderness in 1934. He left behind evidence of his presence, and he was never definitively located. Beyond those details, much of the story remains unknown. What makes Everett's disappearance different from many other wilderness mysteries is the connection between his work and his vanishing. The same photographs that documented his fascination with the desert also became reminders of the journey from which he never returned. His art preserved his perspective, but it could not preserve the final moments of his life. More than records of distant places, Everett's photographs have endured as fragments of a vanished journey, revealing how he saw the world before his own story became a mystery. They show a young artist who was captivated by landscapes that others passed by, someone who searched for beauty in places defined by distance and silence. The images also preserve a strange contrast. They represent movement, discovery, and curiosity, yet they are now connected to an ending that remains unknown. Each photograph offers a glimpse into Everett's world, but none reveals what happened after his final documented days. In many ways, the mystery of Everett Roos has lasted because his disappearance feels connected to the very qualities that defined him. He spent his life seeking remote places, embracing uncertainty, and following his own path. The same independence that allowed him to experience the Southwest in a way few others did may also be part of why the answers surrounding his disappearance remain so difficult to find. Today, the photographs connected to Everett Roos continue to preserve the final known chapter of an artist who disappeared while following the same wilderness that inspired his work. They remain as evidence of a journey that was carefully documented until the moment the record suddenly ended. The last known photographs of Everett Roos still capture the vision of a young artist searching for something beyond the familiar, while the desert continues to guard the unanswered story of his disappearance. The missing hikers of the Yuba County Mountains, the trip that ended with only questions. On a February evening in Northern California, a simple outing shared by a group of friends appeared to be nothing more than another ordinary night, unaware that the events surrounding it would later become one of the region's most puzzling mysteries. There was no obvious warning that anything unusual was about to happen, no indication that a routine trip would lead investigators into a frozen mountain landscape searching for answers. The men involved were not setting out on a planned wilderness expedition, and they were not equipped for a dangerous journey into the snow-covered terrain. Yet somewhere between a basketball game, a drive through unfamiliar roads, and an abandoned vehicle left high in the mountains, their story took a turn that remains difficult to understand decades later. Behind the mystery of the Yuba County Five were 5 individuals whose lives before that night were defined not by disappearance, but by friendships, routines, and connections within their community. The group consisted of Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, Ted Wire, Jack Hewitt, and Gary Mathias. 4 of the men had grown up in the Yuba City area, while Mathias lived nearby and was known by the others. They shared common interests including sports, and several had a connection to a local basketball team for people with developmental disabilities. On February 24, 1978, 4 members of the group travelled to Chico, California to attend a basketball game. Their evening seemed ordinary, the kind of activity that would normally end with everyone returning home afterward. But sometime after leaving the game, their movements became difficult to explain. Instead of heading back toward Yuba County, the men ended up driving toward the Sierra Nevada foothills, an area far removed from their expected route. Hours after leaving behind the familiar surroundings of their hometown, the group's unexpected route toward the mountains created the first unanswered question in a case that investigators would struggle to explain. No clear reason has ever been established for why they travelled toward the remote area near the Plumas National Forest. The road they took led them into a region where winter conditions could become severe, and the decision to continue into the mountains appeared even more unusual because they were not dressed or prepared for an extended time outdoors. The mystery deepened when their 1969 Mercury Montego was discovered on February 28th, 4 days after they disappeared. The vehicle was found abandoned on a Forest Service road near the mountains above Oroville, California. It was stuck in deep snow, suggesting that the car had become trapped and could no longer continue. Inside and around the vehicle, investigators found no immediate explanation for why the men had left it behind. Far from where anyone expected them to be, their abandoned vehicle was discovered in a remote area covered by winter conditions, offering investigators the first physical clue while raising even more uncertainty. The car itself became one of the most important pieces of evidence in the case because it revealed where the group's journey had ended, but it did not explain why they had gone there in the first place. The location of the vehicle raised several difficult questions. The men had travelled many miles away from their homes and into an area where temperatures could drop dramatically at night. They did not have proper winter clothing, snow equipment, or enough supplies for a mountain stay. Their presence there suggested either that they had chosen to leave the vehicle for a specific reason, or that something had happened that caused them to abandon it. The search for the missing men began under challenging conditions. The area around the abandoned car was covered with snow, and investigators had to consider the possibility that the group had attempted to walk back towards civilization. However, the mountain environment made tracking their movements extremely difficult. Snow could conceal signs of travel, weather conditions could change quickly, and the search area extended across rugged terrain. As rescuers moved through the snow-covered terrain searching for 5 missing men, the surrounding wilderness revealed how quickly a familiar region could become a difficult place to survive. Search teams examined the area around the vehicle and expanded their efforts into nearby locations, hoping to find footprints, belongings, or any evidence that could reveal the direction the men had taken. For weeks, the search produced few answers. The disappearance became increasingly unusual because there were no clear signs explaining what had happened after the group left the vehicle. Investigators knew where the men's journey had changed, but they did not know what decisions were made afterward, or whether all 5 men had remained together. The first major breakthrough came months later when a remote cabin was discovered in the mountains. On June 4, 1978, searchers found the body of Ted Wire inside a trailer at an abandoned Forest Service camp known as Camp 7. The discovery revealed that at least some of the men had reached the area after leaving their vehicle. Months after the disappearance began, a remote mountain shelter provided the breakthrough investigators had been searching for, revealing evidence that changed the understanding of what may have happened. The cabin contained supplies that suggested the men had found a place where they might have survived. There was food available, and there were indications that someone had been inside the shelter. The discovery created one of the most haunting parts of the case. Wire had been found wearing only some of his clothing, and investigators determined that he had survived for a period of time before his death. The exact circumstances surrounding those final days remained uncertain, but the evidence suggested that the men had not disappeared immediately after leaving their vehicle. Within the walls of the abandoned cabin, investigators found signs that told part of the story, yet those same discoveries created contradictions that remained central to the mystery. If the men had reached the shelter, why were they unable to survive despite having access to food and protection from the elements? Why had they not remained together? And why did their actions appear so difficult to understand? The evidence suggested that the group may have been separated during their final days. The remains of Jack Madruga and Jack Hewitt were later discovered in the surrounding area, while Bill Sterling's remains were also found nearby. These discoveries confirmed that several members of the group had travelled through the mountains after leaving the vehicle, but they did not reveal the reason behind their decisions. One of the most unusual aspects of the case involved the condition of the shelter itself. Investigators found that food supplies had been left behind, including enough resources that might have helped someone survive longer. The presence of these supplies became a major question because it suggested that survival may have been possible, yet the group still did not make it out of the mountains. Separate from the discoveries that brought some answers to the case, one missing man remained at the centre of the unresolved questions surrounding the Yuba County Five. Gary Mathias was never found. His disappearance added another layer of uncertainty because, unlike the others, there was no confirmed explanation for where he went after the group entered the mountains. Evidence connected to Mathias was discovered later, including his shoes, but his remains were never located. Some investigators believed that he may have become separated from the others, while others considered different possibilities. Without additional evidence, his fate remains unknown. The disappearance was especially difficult to understand because the men had not simply vanished without leaving clues. Investigators found their vehicle, located a shelter where some had survived, and recovered remains that revealed part of the timeline. Yet the most important questions remained unanswered. Over the decades that followed, numerous explanations attempted to account for the strange sequence of events, but none could fully connect every piece of evidence left behind. Some theories suggest that the men became confused or disoriented after reaching the mountains. Others have considered whether an outside event played a role. However, no explanation has been proven, and the case remains open to interpretation. One possibility is that the men became trapped by circumstances they could not overcome. The winter environment was unforgiving, and the combination of cold temperatures, limited preparation, and difficult terrain created a situation where even reaching shelter may not have been enough. Another possibility is that confusion or poor decisions affected their ability to survive, although the exact reasons remain uncertain. What separates the Yuba County Five case from many other wilderness disappearances is the strange combination of evidence and unanswered questions. There were discoveries but no complete explanation. There were locations but no clear timeline of events. There were signs of survival, but not enough information to understand why survival ultimately failed. Even after decades of investigation and discussion, the events that unfolded after the five friends entered the mountains remain a story defined by evidence, uncertainty, and unanswered questions. The case continues to draw attention because each discovery seems to solve one part of the mystery while creating another. The Yuba County Five were not experienced wilderness explorers seeking a dangerous adventure. They were friends who had spent an ordinary evening together before making a journey that led them into a place they were never expected to be. That contrast remains one of the most unsettling parts of the story. Their disappearance also serves as a reminder that mysteries do not always come from unexplored places. Sometimes they begin with ordinary decisions that lead somewhere unexpected, leaving behind only fragments of what really happened. The case of the Yuba County Five remains a collection of scattered clues and unanswered questions, with each discovery revealing only another fragment of what may have happened in the mountains. The final photos of Chris Krimmers and Lisanne Froon, the hikers who vanished in Panama. Captured during moments that seem ordinary at first, photographs can sometimes become something far different years later, preserving the last known traces of people whose stories suddenly came to an end. A picture taken during a walk, a trip, or a simple moment of exploration is usually meant to preserve memories, not become evidence in an investigation. Yet in rare cases, images taken without any sense of importance later become the only surviving record of what someone was doing before they disappeared. The photographs left behind by Chris Kremers and Lisanne Froon became part of one of the most examined missing person cases in recent years because they offered a glimpse into their final known hours while leaving behind questions that could not be answered by images alone. Before their names became connected to one of the most widely discussed hiking mysteries in Panama, Chris Kremers and Lisanne Froon were two young travellers beginning a journey meant to be filled with exploration and new experiences. The two women were from the Netherlands and had travelled to Panama in March 2014 with plans that combined tourism, language practice, and cultural experiences. Chris was 21 years old, while Lisanne was 22, and both had been preparing for their time abroad before leaving Europe. Their trip was not planned as a dangerous expedition into remote wilderness. Like many travellers, they had arrived in Panama hoping to experience a different country, meet local people, and explore the surrounding areas. They stayed in the town of Boquete, a popular destination in western Panama known for its cooler climate, nearby mountains, and outdoor activities. During their stay in the town of Boquete, the two Dutch women followed plans that appeared typical of visitors exploring a foreign country, unaware that one decision would later become the focus of a major investigation. They had arranged to spend time with a local family as part of a volunteer program, but before that activity began, they decided to take a hike along the Pianista Trail, a route that leads through mountainous terrain outside the town. The trail was not considered an extreme expedition route, and the women appeared to approach it as a normal outdoor activity. On March 31st, 2014, Chris and Lisanne left Boquete carrying personal belongings, including their phones and a digital camera. Their decision to document the hike would later provide investigators with some of the most important evidence connected to their disappearance. On the afternoon of March 31st, 2014, the images recorded along the Pianista Trail showed two hikers enjoying their surroundings, creating a final, ordinary glimpse before the uncertainty began. The photographs taken that day showed Chris and Lisanne smiling, walking along the trail and exploring the area together. At the time, there was nothing in the images suggesting that anything unusual was about to happen. The photographs became significant because they established a timeline. They confirmed that the women had reached the trail and provided a visual record of their movements before communication with them stopped. The images showed a normal hiking trip, making the events that followed even more difficult to understand. Later that day, the women continued beyond the point where many visitors typically turn back, reaching areas farther along the trail. At some point after the final known daytime photographs, their expected return did not happen. They did not arrive back in Boquete, and their families and others who knew their plans became concerned when they could no longer be reached. When evening arrived and Chris and Lisanne did not return as expected, a routine hiking trip transformed into a search for answers that would continue far beyond the trail where they were last seen. Initially, there was uncertainty about what had happened. A delayed return from a hike was not automatically evidence of a serious problem, but as time passed without contact, concern increased. Search efforts began in the area around the Pianista Trail, with authorities, locals, and volunteers looking for signs of the missing travellers. The rugged environment created challenges, as the trail passed through dense vegetation, steep areas, and remote sections where locating someone could be difficult. For weeks, searches continued without a clear explanation of where Chris and Lisanne had gone after leaving the trail. Investigators examined possible routes, interviewed people who may have encountered the women, and attempted to reconstruct their final movements. However, the evidence available at that stage provided only pieces of a much larger mystery. Months later, the discovery of their belongings revealed a piece of technology that would become central to the case, containing photographs that raised new questions about the events following their disappearance. In June 2014, a resident found a backpack near a river in the area. Inside were personal belongings belonging to Chris and Lisanne, including their phones, camera, and other items. The discovery changed the investigation because the devices contained information that helped create a timeline after the women had disappeared from view. The camera held the photographs taken during their hike, but it also contained additional images captured after the final daytime pictures. Among the most discussed pieces of evidence were photographs taken during the early hours of April 8th, more than a week after the women entered the trail. These nighttime images showed dark surroundings and unfamiliar details, leading investigators and researchers to examine them closely for clues about what may have happened during that period. The meaning of these photographs remains one of the most debated aspects of the case. The images do not provide a clear explanation of the women's final movements, but they demonstrate that the camera was still being used after their disappearance. Because of this, the photographs became central to attempts to understand the timeline between the hike and the later discoveries. Beyond the images themselves, the information stored inside their phones and cameras created a timeline of partial answers, showing attempts to seek help while leaving important moments unexplained. Phone records showed that emergency calls were made after the women disappeared, including attempts to contact emergency services using their mobile devices. The phone data revealed that Chris and Lisanne had attempted to seek assistance, but the available information could not explain exactly where they were when those calls were made, or what circumstances led them to make them. The records confirmed that something had gone wrong, but they did not provide a complete account of what happened afterward. The combination of photographs, phone records, and recovered belongings created a rare situation in which investigators had more digital evidence than many missing person cases provide. Yet having evidence did not necessarily mean having answers. Each piece helped establish parts of the timeline while leaving gaps that remained difficult to fill. As investigators and search teams continued examining the area around the trail, recovered belongings and later discoveries provided evidence that helped reconstruct parts of the women's final days. Human remains were later found in the region, and authorities determined that they belonged to Chris and Lisanne. These discoveries confirmed that the two women had died in the area, but they did not resolve every question surrounding their final hours. The investigation led to different interpretations of the available evidence. Some researchers focused on the possibility of an accident in difficult terrain, while others examined whether outside factors may have played a role. However, many details remained uncertain, and no explanation has fully answered every question raised by the timeline. Despite the discoveries that brought some clarity to the investigation, several details surrounding Chris and Lisanne's final hours have continued to generate questions about what happened after their last confirmed photographs. The nighttime images, the emergency calls, and the absence of a complete timeline have all contributed to continued discussion about the case. One of the reasons the mystery has remained so widely discussed is the unusual role of technology. The camera and phones preserved fragments of the women's final journey, allowing investigators to see pieces of their experience after they entered the trail. But those same records also highlighted how much remained unknown. The photographs are especially haunting because they begin as ordinary travel images. They show two people enjoying a new environment, unaware that those moments would later become the final visual record of their lives. They were never intended to document a mystery, yet they became inseparable from one. Unlike a written statement or a recorded account, a photograph can only capture what exists within its frame. It can show a location, an expression, or a moment in time, but it cannot reveal what happened before or after the image was taken. Years after the disappearance of the two Dutch hikers, the photographs recovered from their camera remain among the most significant records of a journey that was never fully explained. They preserve the beginning of the story, the evidence of their presence, and the final confirmed images before uncertainty took over. The case of Chris Kremers and Lisanne Froon continues to remain one of the most examined hiking disappearances, because the evidence is both revealing and incomplete. Their photographs, phones, and belongings provide a timeline, but not the complete story. The final images taken by Chris Kremers and Lisanne Froon still capture a journey that began with curiosity and exploration, while the unanswered moments beyond those photographs continue to leave behind one of the most enduring mysteries connected to a hiking trail. The last photos of Tom Ballard and Daniele Nardi, the climbers who never returned from Nanga Parbat. Long before an expedition reaches its highest point, people far from the mountain often begin following its progress through a steady stream of photographs, updates, and brief messages, unaware that those ordinary glimpses may become the final public record of those still climbing. Modern mountaineering has made even the world's most remote peaks feel unexpectedly close, allowing supporters to watch ambitious ascents unfold almost day by day. Images shared from base camps and high camps offer reassurance that the climb is continuing, yet there are rare moments when the final photograph reaches the outside world before anyone realizes it has become the last chapter of an unfolding tragedy. Such was the case during a winter expedition on Nanga Parbat, where the final published photographs of two accomplished climbers would eventually become lasting reminders of an ascent that ended with questions the mountain has never fully answered. Among the mountaineers preparing for one of the most ambitious winter ascents of their careers were British climber Tom Ballard and Italian alpinist Daniele Nardi. whose shared objective had been years in the making. Nardi had devoted much of his climbing career to Nanga Parbat, particularly to the formidable Mummery Spur, a route named after British mountaineer Albert F. Mummery, who disappeared on the mountain in 1895. Numerous attempts had failed to conquer the spur during winter, and the route had developed a reputation as one of the last great unsolved challenges in high-altitude mountaineering. Tom Ballard brought his own remarkable reputation to the expedition. The son of renowned British climber Alison Hargreaves, who herself died on K2 in 1995 after successfully summiting the mountain, Ballard had established himself as an exceptional alpinist through a series of difficult solo winter climbs in the Alps. Rather than seeking publicity, he was known within the climbing community for quiet determination and technical ability. His partnership with Nardi combined experience, ambition, and a shared willingness to attempt a route that many regarded as one of the most demanding objectives in the Himalayas. Few mountains have earned a reputation as formidable as Nanga Parbat during winter, where severe weather, relentless exposure, and technical terrain have tested even the world's most accomplished climbers. Rising to 8,126 metres, it is the 9th highest mountain on Earth, yet its reputation extends beyond elevation. Long before modern climbing equipment existed, expeditions struggled against its immense faces, unpredictable avalanches, and extreme weather. Decades ago, repeated fatal expeditions earned it the nickname the Killer Mountain, a title that reflected its tragic history rather than any mystery surrounding it. The Mummery Spur represented one of the mountain's greatest remaining challenges. Unlike more established routes, it demanded sustained technical climbing through steep, unstable terrain that became even more hazardous during winter. Snow accumulation, ice formation, powerful winds, and rapidly changing conditions meant that every stage of the ascent required careful judgment. Even experienced climbers understood that progress could change from manageable to impossible within hours. As the climb progressed, the images released from the expedition showed two determined climbers steadily advancing toward their objective, giving supporters every reason to believe the ascent was unfolding according to plan. The published photographs were not dramatic attempts to document danger. Instead, they showed ordinary moments familiar to many mountaineering expeditions: preparations at camp, equipment organised against the cold, and determined expressions as the pair continued upward. Their faces reflected concentration rather than alarm, reinforcing the impression that the expedition remained under control despite the enormous challenges ahead. These photographs served another purpose beyond preserving memories. They documented the expedition's progress for sponsors, supporters, family members, and fellow climbers following developments from around the world. In an age when satellite communication allowed updates from some of the planet's most isolated places, each image confirmed another successful stage of the climb. No one viewing them could know they were also looking at the last confirmed visual record of Tom Ballard and Daniele Nardi alive. Then the steady flow of communication came to an abrupt halt, leaving those following the expedition with nothing to measure except the growing length of the silence. The absence of further updates was initially met with cautious patience. Weather on Nanga Parbat frequently interrupted communication, and delays were not unusual during winter expeditions. Climbers sometimes remained out of contact while waiting for conditions to improve or while navigating sections where communication equipment functioned poorly. As hours became days, however, concern spread through the climbing community. Attempts to establish contact produced no response, and the silence gradually became impossible to dismiss as a temporary interruption. Friends, fellow climbers, and family members recognized that something had likely gone wrong high on the mountain, although no one yet knew where the pair had reached or what circumstances had interrupted their ascent. Once concern turned into certainty that something had gone wrong, rescuers faced the daunting task of searching one of the most dangerous environments on Earth for two climbers who had seemingly vanished into the mountain. Coordinating a rescue on Nanga Parbat during winter presented extraordinary challenges. Helicopters could operate only within strict weather limits, while rescuers themselves faced avalanche hazards, unstable snow, and extreme altitude. Every attempt to reach higher sections of the mountain involved considerable personal risk. The international climbing community responded quickly. Experienced mountaineers already in Pakistan adjusted their own plans to assist where possible, demonstrating the close bonds that often exist among high-altitude climbers regardless of nationality. Search efforts combined aerial reconnaissance with ground observations whenever conditions permitted, but deteriorating weather repeatedly limited what rescuers could accomplish. One of the greatest difficulties lay in the sheer scale of the terrain. A mountain face extending for thousands of vertical meters offers countless gullies, snowfields, ice cliffs, and avalanche paths capable of concealing even experienced climbers. Unlike lower elevation searches where teams can systematically cover defined areas, high-altitude operations often depend on brief windows of visibility and educated judgment about where climbers were most likely to have travelled. When search teams finally located evidence high on Nanga Parbat, the discovery answered one question while leaving the most important one unresolved. In early March 2019, helicopter crews participating in the search observed what appeared to be the bodies of two climbers on the Mummery Spur. Their location strongly suggested they were Tom Ballard and Daniele Nardi. Because of the extreme danger presented by the terrain, immediate recovery proved impossible, and later assessments confirmed that the conditions made retrieval exceptionally hazardous. The discovery brought painful certainty to families and supporters who had hoped for another outcome, yet it did not provide a complete account of what had happened during the expedition's final stage. No witness observed the climbers' last movements, and no surviving record explained the sequence of events that ended the ascent. Investigators and experienced mountaineers could examine terrain, weather reports, and the climbers' known progress, but the precise circumstances remained beyond direct observation. Viewed after the tragedy, the expedition photographs acquired a meaning they never carried when they were first shared, preserving moments that would soon become impossible to revisit. Images originally intended to document determination and progress gradually became historical records of an expedition that would never return. Every smile, every carefully packed rope, every glimpse of the immense mountain behind them gained significance simply because the photographs marked the last confirmed moments before communication ended forever. Unlike recovered cameras that sometimes preserve hidden evidence, these photographs offered no dramatic clue waiting to be discovered. Their importance came from their simplicity. They showed capable climbers continuing a carefully planned expedition, exactly as countless others had done before. Nothing within the images predicted disaster, reminding viewers how little a single photograph can reveal about the future waiting beyond its frame. Even with modern equipment, experienced rescuers, and a documented timeline, the mountain has never fully revealed exactly how the final stage of the climb unfolded. Weather records, terrain analysis, and expert opinion have all contributed to discussions about what may have occurred, including the possibility of an avalanche or another mountaineering accident. Yet because no direct evidence records the final moments, those explanations remain informed conclusions rather than complete reconstructions. For many within the climbing community, the unanswered questions surrounding Ballard and Nardi are not rooted in sensational speculation, but in respect for the realities of high-altitude mountaineering. Mountains such as Nanga Parbat often preserve only fragments of a story. Climbers leave behind routes, camps, equipment, photographs, and messages, while the decisive moments themselves may remain forever beyond human observation. What remains today is not only the record of an ambitious ascent, but also a series of photographs that quietly transformed from progress reports into the last visible chapter of an unfinished story. They continue to remind climbers that even in an era of satellite communication and digital technology, the world's highest mountains can still interrupt a story without warning, leaving only scattered pieces from which others attempt to understand what happened. The last photographs of Tom Ballard and Daniele Nardi still stand as the final confirmed glimpse of two climbers whose ascent into Nanga Parbat ended with questions the mountain has never completely answered. The cameras that returned without their owners. Sometimes the most important discovery made during a wilderness search is not a person, but a camera resting silently among rocks, trees, or forgotten equipment, waiting to reveal fragments of a journey that suddenly came to an end. Search teams are trained to look for clothing, footprints, backpacks, and any object capable of narrowing the search area. Yet cameras often carry a unique significance because they preserve moments exactly as they occurred. Long after voices have fallen silent and trails have disappeared beneath changing weather, the images inside a recovered camera remain untouched, offering investigators one final opportunity to follow someone who can no longer explain where they were going. For families, the recovery of such a device can inspire hope that answers are close at hand. For investigators, it marks the beginning of an entirely different search, one conducted not across mountains or forests, but through photographs frozen in time. Unlike memories that fade or witness accounts that conflict, a camera preserves every photograph with complete indifference, recording moments without knowing which one will eventually become the last. Every image carries information beyond what appears at first glance. Light conditions reveal the approximate time of day. Clouds suggest changing weather. Vegetation helps narrow locations. Shadows indicate the position of the sun. Modern digital cameras and smartphones may also preserve timestamps, file sequences, and technical data recorded automatically with each photograph. None of these details explain what happened after the picture was taken, yet together they can establish a timeline that no witness could reproduce from memory alone. A recovered camera therefore becomes more than a collection of memories. It becomes a silent witness whose testimony must be interpreted with extraordinary care. From the instant search teams recover a camera, its purpose changes completely, transforming from a personal keepsake into an object examined for every clue hidden within its photographs, timestamps, and condition. Investigators first document exactly where it was found before carefully preserving the device to prevent accidental damage or loss of digital information. Specialists may create forensic copies of memory cards to ensure the original files remain untouched during examination. Rather than searching only for dramatic discoveries, investigators often focus on seemingly ordinary details. The order in which photographs were taken, the amount of battery remaining, gaps between images, or signs that files were deleted can all contribute to reconstructing the final known movements of a missing person. Even when no single photograph provides an answer, the sequence as a whole can establish a chronology that shapes every subsequent stage of an investigation. Few recovered cameras have received as much international attention as the one discovered inside the backpack belonging to Chris Kremers and Lisanne Froon, where hundreds of digital files became central to understanding their final known movements. Months after the two Dutch hikers disappeared while exploring trails near a bosquet, Panama, local residents discovered a backpack beside a river. Inside were personal belongings that included a Canon digital camera, mobile phones, and other items that appeared remarkably intact despite the surrounding wilderness. The camera's memory card contained daytime photographs taken during the early stages of their hike, showing the women smiling as they reached the mirador along the Pianista Trail before continuing beyond the viewpoint. Later in the sequence came the now famous series of nighttime images captured more than a week after their disappearance. Together, those photographs transformed an ordinary travel camera into one of the most scrutinized pieces of evidence in a modern missing person investigation. Although the photographs established an invaluable timeline, they also demonstrated how even an extensive collection of images can leave the most critical moments forever outside the frame. Investigators used the timestamps to estimate the progression of events and compared visible terrain, vegetation, and weather conditions with known locations throughout the region. Researchers and independent analysts later attempted to identify landmarks visible in the nighttime photographs, hoping to determine where the camera had been used during those final hours. Yet despite years of examination, the images never produced a definitive explanation. They documented that the camera remained operational long after the hikers first disappeared, but they did not reveal precisely why the photographs were taken, what circumstances surrounded them, or what happened immediately afterward. The camera preserved evidence, but it also illustrated the limits of photographic documentation. A lens can record only what lies before it, leaving everything beyond its field of view unknown. Decades before digital cameras accompanied nearly every expedition, surviving photographs from Everett Roos's travels offered investigators and historians a quieter but equally compelling record of the places he explored before disappearing into the deserts of the American Southwest in 1934. Roos travelled with cameras and produced striking photographs alongside his sketches and letters, documenting mesas, narrow canyons, sandstone formations, and isolated camps that reflected both his artistic vision and his attraction to remote landscapes. After his disappearance, those surviving photographs became valuable historical records because they established where he had travelled and revealed the environments that inspired his final journeys. Unlike modern digital evidence, they contained no embedded timestamps or electronic data. Instead, historians relied upon the landscapes themselves, comparing visible landmarks with known locations and combining the photographs with Roos's written correspondence to reconstruct portions of his route. His images did not solve the mystery of his disappearance, but they preserved an authentic record of the final world he intentionally chose to explore. Elsewhere in the world's highest mountains, recovered cameras and preserved film have occasionally outlasted the expeditions that carried them, turning ordinary photographic equipment into unexpected historical archives. One of the most remarkable examples emerged in 1937, when members of the British expedition to Mount Everest discovered the body of Maurice Wilson, an aviator who had attempted to climb the mountain alone after flying illegally toward Tibet. Alongside his remains were notebooks, photographic equipment, and exposed film documenting his extraordinary journey. Years later, the film was successfully developed, providing rare visual evidence of Wilson's final expedition and preserving moments that otherwise would have disappeared forever beneath snow and ice. Similar discoveries from glaciers and high-altitude environments have demonstrated that extreme cold can preserve photographic materials for decades, allowing forgotten expeditions to speak again through images long after their owners are gone. Strangely enough, the same wilderness capable of concealing a person for years can sometimes preserve a camera well enough for investigators to recover images long after the journey itself has ended. Waterproof housings, padded backpacks, sealed memory cards, and cold temperatures occasionally protect delicate electronics from complete destruction. Even when cameras suffer physical damage, advances in digital forensic technology have sometimes allowed specialists to recover photographs from damaged storage devices that initially appeared unreadable. In other situations, memory cards separated from their cameras have continued to retain files, despite prolonged exposure to water or harsh environmental conditions. Every successful recovery demonstrates that fragile objects can sometimes outlast far stronger materials, preserving visual records even when the people who created them remain missing, or their final moments cannot be reconstructed. Once every image has been carefully arranged into sequence, investigators begin reading a recovered camera, almost as though it were a silent witness, searching for details its owner never intended to document. Reflections in sunglasses may reveal the position of companions. The angle of sunlight helps estimate direction. Streams, ridgelines, distinctive trees, and unusual rock formations can all become reference points when compared with maps, satellite imagery, and aerial surveys. Specialists may enlarge tiny portions of a photograph looking for equipment, footprints, or subtle environmental features that escaped attention during the original investigation. Yet this process also demands restraint. Human beings naturally search for patterns, and investigators understand the danger of interpreting ordinary shadows or blurred shapes as meaningful evidence without independent confirmation. A recovered photograph is valuable precisely because it captures reality, but that reality must be interpreted through verifiable facts rather than hopeful assumptions. What ultimately returns from some disappearances is not an explanation, but a collection of photographs that continue telling only the beginning of a story, whose ending remains beyond the reach of every investigation. Cameras survive because they faithfully record moments without understanding their significance, leaving future investigators to assemble fragments into a narrative that may never become complete. Whether resting inside a backpack recovered beside a river, preserved beneath mountain ice, or discovered among the belongings of someone who never came home, each camera carries the same quiet contradiction. It offers undeniable evidence while withholding the one answer every family and every investigator hopes to find. The cameras that returned without their owners continue to preserve silent fragments of vanished journeys, reminding investigators that every recovered photograph can illuminate the path while leaving the destination forever unknown. When the last photograph became a crucial clue, spread across an investigator's desk, a single photograph can become the starting point for an entire search, inviting questions that the image itself never intended to answer. To most people, it may appear to be nothing more than a snapshot from a day outdoors, a smiling face on a trail, a mountain rising behind the subject, or a quiet stretch of forest beneath clear skies. Yet once a hiker disappears, the photograph is no longer viewed as a memory. It becomes evidence. Every visible detail is examined with new purpose, not because the image contains obvious answers, but because it may preserve small facts that were unnoticed when the shutter was pressed. The challenge facing investigators is that a photograph never explains itself. It offers information without interpretation, forcing those studying it to distinguish meaningful clues from ordinary scenery. At first glance, an ordinary hiking photograph appears to capture little more than a moment of travel, yet experienced investigators learn to examine every visible detail before drawing a single conclusion. Clothing becomes important because it reflects the conditions the person expected to encounter. A jacket tied around someone's waist may suggest warmer temperatures than weather forecasts alone. The position of a backpack can indicate whether the hike had only begun or whether supplies had already been consumed. Trekking poles, water bottles, cameras, maps, and footwear all contribute to understanding the circumstances surrounding the journey. Even facial expressions can sometimes provide context, although investigators remain careful not to assign emotional meaning where none can be proven. Their task is not to speculate about thoughts or intentions, but to establish observable facts that can withstand careful scrutiny. Beyond the scenery preserved inside the frame, modern photographs often carry an invisible record of when and how they were created, providing investigators with a timeline that cannot easily be altered. Most digital cameras and smartphones automatically record technical information known as exchangeable image file format, or EXIF, data. Depending on the device and its settings, this information may include the exact date and time a photograph was taken, camera model, shutter speed, focal length, and, in some cases, GPS coordinates. Investigators treat this metadata as carefully as the image itself because it helps verify chronology and establish the sequence of events. Even when location information is unavailable, timestamps alone can reveal how quickly a person moved between photographs or identify long gaps during which no images were taken. The disappearance of Chris Kremers and Lisanne Froon demonstrated how digital photographs can become central to reconstructing a timeline without fully resolving the mystery itself. Investigators examining the Canon camera recovered from their backpack found that the sequence of photographs documented the hikers reaching the Mirador before continuing beyond the Continental Divide. More than a week later, another series of nighttime images appeared on the memory card, creating one of the most discussed collections of photographs in a modern missing person investigation. The timestamps established when each image had been captured, allowing investigators to reconstruct a chronology that would otherwise have been impossible. Yet although the camera revealed when the photographs were taken, it could not explain why they were taken, what had happened between them, or what circumstances surrounded the hikers at the moment each image was recorded. The timeline became clearer, while the larger mystery remained unresolved. Matching a photograph to the landscape requires far more than recognizing a mountain or a trail, because even the smallest natural feature can become the key to identifying a precise location. Search specialists often compare photographs with topographic maps, satellite imagery, drone surveys, and previous expedition records, looking for combinations of distinctive landmarks that appear together only in certain places. A bend in a river, an unusual rock formation, the angle of a ridgeline, or the arrangement of distant peaks may narrow an enormous search area to a much smaller section of terrain. This process demands patience because natural landscapes frequently appear similar at first glance. A single waterfall or stand of trees rarely provides enough information on its own, but several features considered together can produce a remarkably accurate estimate of where the photographer once stood. Changing weather often leaves subtle clues inside a photograph, allowing investigators to compare clouds, lighting, water levels, and seasonal conditions with historical records from the day it was taken. Meteorological data may confirm whether rain had begun, whether snow remained at higher elevations, or whether rivers were likely running higher than usual. The position of shadows can also assist investigators in estimating the approximate time of day when independent timestamps are unavailable or require verification. In historical cases involving film photography, these environmental clues sometimes become the only reliable indicators of chronology. Even vegetation contributes valuable information. The flowering stage of alpine plants, the colour of autumn foliage, or the depth of accumulated snow can help determine whether a photograph aligns with the reported timeline of a missing person's journey. Just as importantly, photographs frequently help investigators rule out explanations that appear convincing until they are tested against the evidence preserved within the image itself. Public attention often generates theories suggesting that a missing hiker travelled farther than expected, encountered another individual, or reached a location inconsistent with official findings. Investigators compare such claims against the available photographs to determine whether they are supported by observable evidence. If clothing remains dry despite claims of severe rainfall, if terrain does not match a proposed location, or if the sequence of photographs contradicts a suggested route, those theories can often be dismissed without relying on speculation. In many investigations, eliminating incorrect possibilities proves nearly as valuable as discovering new leads, because it allows search resources to remain focused on evidence rather than rumour. Advances in digital analysis have allowed investigators to return repeatedly to decades-old photographs, searching for overlooked details with tools that did not exist when the images were first examined. Modern software can enhance contrast, recover shadow detail, improve sharpness, and enlarge small portions of an image without altering the original evidence. Three-dimensional terrain modelling allows analysts to compare mountains and valleys visible in photographs with precise digital reconstructions of the landscape. Satellite imagery offers another means of verifying locations, while geographic information systems enable investigators to estimate viewpoints and travel routes with increasing accuracy. None of these technologies create evidence that was absent before, but they often reveal subtle details that earlier investigators lacked the ability to examine. As technology improves, old photographs occasionally yield new information simply because people have learned better ways to study them. Outside official investigations, countless people have stared at the same photographs, believing they noticed hidden figures, secret messages, or overlooked clues that others somehow missed. Internet forums dedicated to unsolved disappearances frequently produce detailed analyses in which ordinary shadows are interpreted as people. Blurred vegetation becomes evidence of movement, or reflections appear to conceal unidentified individuals. Psychologists recognize this tendency as pareidolia, the human inclination to perceive meaningful patterns where none actually exist. Investigators remain aware of this phenomenon because confirmation bias can easily distort an objective examination of evidence. Every claimed discovery must therefore be tested against independent facts, rather than accepted because it appears convincing at first glance. A mysterious photograph naturally invites imagination, but successful investigations depend upon disciplined observation rather than wishful interpretation. Even after every pixel has been enlarged and every landmark carefully compared, one unavoidable limitation remains. A photograph records only a fraction of reality. It preserves a single direction of view while concealing everything behind the camera. It captures one instant while leaving the moments immediately before and after forever unseen. It cannot record conversations, intentions, sounds, injuries, exhaustion, or decisions made once the photographer continues walking. Investigators therefore approach every image with equal measures of optimism and restraint, recognizing that photographs are among the most valuable forms of physical evidence, while also accepting that they can never tell the entire story. Their greatest strength lies in documenting facts. Their greatest limitation is that they stop recording the instant the shutter closes. Perhaps that is why investigators rarely stop returning to these images, because every careful examination carries the possibility that one overlooked detail could finally reshape an entire case. Long after search operations have ended and public attention has faded, photographs continue waiting with remarkable patience, unchanged by the passing of time while new techniques and fresh perspectives revisit them again and again. Some eventually reveal overlooked landmarks or confirm uncertain timelines, while others continue resisting every attempt at interpretation. In either outcome, the last photograph remains one of the few pieces of evidence capable of transporting investigators back to the final confirmed moment of a journey, allowing them to stand, if only briefly, where a missing hiker once stood before the trail disappeared into uncertainty. When the last photograph became a crucial clue, it revealed just enough to guide an investigation, while ensuring that its greatest unanswered question remained forever outside the frame. The legends that grew around the last photographs. Once an investigation releases a photograph to the public, its meaning no longer belongs solely to the people searching for answers, because thousands of strangers begin examining it through their own eyes. A photograph that once existed as a private memory suddenly becomes part of newspapers, documentaries, online discussions, and missing person campaigns, where every visible detail is scrutinized by people who have never visited the trail or spoken to those involved in the search. Unlike investigators, whose conclusions must be supported by verifiable evidence, the public approaches these images with curiosity, emotion, and imagination. As a result, some photographs gradually acquire a second history, one built not from what the camera actually recorded, but from the countless interpretations that emerged after the search had already begun. In many famous disappearances, the legends surrounding the photographs have become almost as well known as the investigations themselves. Human nature rarely accepts an unanswered mystery without trying to complete it, and few pieces of evidence invite that instinct more powerfully than a photograph taken shortly before someone vanished. Psychologists have long recognized that people naturally search for patterns when confronted with uncertainty, especially when a complete explanation is missing. An unresolved image encourages viewers to look beyond its obvious subject, asking whether a shadow might conceal another person, whether an object has been overlooked, or whether the composition itself contains an unintended clue. Most of these interpretations arise from a genuine desire to help rather than an intention to mislead. Families, amateur researchers, photographers, and ordinary observers often spend hours studying a single frame, believing that careful attention might reveal something investigators missed. Yet the same uncertainty that inspires careful observation also creates fertile ground for speculation. No collection of hiking photographs has generated more sustained public scrutiny than the images recovered from the camera belonging to Chris Kremers and Lisanne Froon, whose final photographs continue to inspire new interpretations years after they were taken. The nighttime images released during the investigation became the focus of extraordinary attention almost immediately. Viewers enlarged individual frames, adjusted brightness and contrast, and searched every corner of the photographs for signs that might explain where the two hikers had been or what had happened to them. Some observers believed they could identify human figures hidden in the darkness, while others pointed to unusual shapes among rocks and vegetation that they interpreted as evidence of campsites, rescue attempts, or the presence of another individual. Investigators acknowledged the photographs as important evidence, but many of the more dramatic interpretations circulating online were never supported by official findings. The images themselves remained authentic, the stories attached to them multiplied far beyond what the available evidence could confirm. Far from the official search teams, online communities began conducting investigations of their own, enlarging images, comparing pixels, and debating details that professional investigators had already considered or dismissed. Internet forums, video essays, and discussion groups dedicated thousands of hours to analysing the same collection of photographs. Digital enhancement software became widely accessible, allowing anyone to sharpen images, alter lighting, or isolate small sections of a frame. Although these tools sometimes improved visibility, they also introduced the risk of seeing significance where none actually existed. A blurred branch became a human silhouette. A reflection appeared to resemble a face. Compression artifacts caused by digital processing were occasionally mistaken for hidden objects. Many participants approached the material with sincere intentions, but without access to the complete investigative record. Isolated photographs often encouraged conclusions that extended well beyond the documented evidence. Long before internet forums existed, the disappearance of Everett Roos demonstrated that legends could grow around surviving photographs even when only a handful of people had ever seen them firsthand. Roos left behind photographs, sketches, journals, and letters documenting his travels across the deserts of the American Southwest, and after his disappearance in 1934, those materials became the foundation upon which later generations attempted to understand both the man and his final journey. As decades passed without a definitive answer, stories surrounding his disappearance expanded far beyond the surviving evidence. Some claimed he had deliberately abandoned society to begin a new life under another identity. Others believed he had fallen victim to violence, while still others suggested that the desert itself had simply concealed every trace of him. His photographs were sometimes interpreted as reflecting hidden intentions or symbolic messages, even though historians generally regard them as artistic records rather than coded clues. The images remained unchanged, but public interpretations evolved with every passing generation. Other disappearances followed a similar path, where incomplete evidence gradually gave way to stories that became increasingly difficult to separate from the documented historical record. The disappearance of the Yuba County Five illustrates how this process can extend well beyond photographs themselves. Although the case centered on a series of puzzling events rather than a recovered camera, decades of discussion transformed uncertain details into widely repeated narratives. Rumors spread through books, documentaries, and online discussions, until many people struggle to distinguish confirmed facts from later embellishments. Similar patterns have appeared in numerous missing person investigations, where isolated pieces of evidence acquire meanings never assigned to them during the original search. Once a mystery enters popular culture, repetition alone can give unsupported claims an appearance of credibility, making careful examination of primary sources more important than ever. Every unresolved photograph leaves behind an empty space that people naturally try to fill, whether through careful observation, hopeful speculation, or stories passed from one generation to the next. Folklore has always developed around unexplained disappearances, but modern technology allows those stories to spread farther and faster than ever before. A single theory shared online can reach millions of viewers within days, encouraging others to revisit the same photographs in search of supporting evidence. Some interpretations become so familiar that they are repeated as accepted facts despite lacking independent verification. Others gradually evolve into local legends, blending genuine history with speculation until the boundary between the two becomes increasingly difficult to recognize. The photographs themselves never change, yet their perceived meaning continues to evolve as new audiences encounter them. Professional investigators approach these growing legends with measured caution, recognizing that compelling theories must still withstand the same standards of evidence as every other lead. Every suggestion generated by the public must be evaluated according to verifiable facts rather than popularity or emotional appeal. If a claimed figure appears in the background of a photograph, investigators compare the original image rather than an altered version. If someone believes a hidden landmark has been identified, the proposed location is tested against maps, terrain surveys, and known travel routes. This disciplined approach sometimes disappoints those hoping for dramatic discoveries, but it reflects a fundamental principle of criminal and missing person investigations. Extraordinary claims require evidence capable of surviving objective examination. Without that standard, speculation can easily overwhelm genuine leads and consume valuable investigative resources. Occasionally, a widely shared theory encourages someone to revisit old evidence or come forward with overlooked information, although far more often it complicates an already difficult investigation. Public interest has undoubtedly contributed to renewed attention in many cold cases, inspiring historians, journalists, and volunteers to re-examine archives or conduct fresh fieldwork using improved technology. In some instances, those efforts have produced worthwhile discoveries unrelated to the original theory that inspired them. More commonly, however, investigators must spend considerable time addressing rumours that cannot be substantiated, correcting misunderstandings created by incomplete information or altered images circulating online. The challenge lies in encouraging constructive public involvement, while preventing unsupported speculation from overshadowing carefully established facts. By the time a famous last photograph has circulated for years, it often exists in two very different forms: the image captured by the camera and the countless stories built around it afterward. One remains fixed, preserving exactly what the lens recorded at a single moment in time. The other continues expanding as each generation asks new questions, develops new theories, and searches once more for answers hidden somewhere within the frame. The contrast between these two versions explains why the most enduring last photographs continue attracting attention decades after the searches have ended. They remind people that uncertainty rarely disappears simply because time has passed. Instead, unanswered questions often inspire new interpretations that become part of the mystery itself, ensuring that the photographs continue to occupy a place somewhere between documented history and enduring legend. The legends that grew around the last photographs continue to reveal as much about humanity's search for answers as they do about the mysteries those images were never able to resolve. Why we still study these photographs. Years after the search teams have packed away their equipment and the trails have grown quiet again, certain photographs continue waiting inside archives, family collections, and digital databases for someone willing to examine them once more. Unlike newspaper headlines or television reports that gradually fade from public attention, a photograph remains unchanged, preserving a single moment exactly as it was captured regardless of how much time has passed. Investigators return to them during cold case reviews. Historians revisit them while studying long-forgotten expeditions. Family members open them on anniversaries, hoping that familiarity might suddenly reveal something they overlooked before. Even people with no personal connection to the cases find themselves studying these images, drawn by the possibility that an ordinary photograph could still contain an extraordinary clue. It is a quiet form of persistence that has continued across generations, driven not by certainty, but by the belief that unanswered questions deserve another careful look. Few things challenge the human mind more than an unanswered question, especially when the answer seems as though it might be hidden within an image that has already been studied countless times before. Cognitive psychologists have long observed that people naturally seek patterns and complete unfinished stories. When a mystery remains unresolved, the mind resists accepting uncertainty as a final answer. Instead, it searches for overlooked details, hoping that one forgotten element will suddenly make sense of everything that came before it. Photographs encourage this instinct because they appear complete while simultaneously concealing so much beyond their borders. Every viewer understands that the camera recorded only one direction, one instant, and one perspective, yet that limitation often strengthens curiosity rather than diminishing it. The unanswered moments surrounding the image become as compelling as the image itself. For the families of missing hikers, these photographs often preserve the final ordinary moments before uncertainty entered their lives, making them far more than simple records of a journey. A smiling face at a trailhead, a pause beside a river, or a photograph taken from a mountain ridge may appear entirely routine to an outside observer, yet to those left behind, these images represent the last confirmed glimpse of someone they loved before communication stopped and questions began. Families frequently describe returning to such photographs not because they expect a miraculous discovery every time they look, but because the images preserve a moment untouched by tragedy. They remind them of who the missing person was rather than only how they disappeared. At the same time, those same photographs inevitably invite difficult questions. Was there a warning hidden somewhere in the background? Did the photographer unknowingly capture something significant? These questions rarely produce definitive answers, but they continue encouraging another careful examination. Cold case investigations frequently begin not with the discovery of new evidence, but with the decision to look again at evidence that has been sitting in plain sight for years. Experienced investigators understand that fresh perspectives can be almost as valuable as fresh discoveries. A photograph dismissed decades earlier because no meaningful landmark could be identified may become useful once additional mapping data, aerial imagery, or improved search records become available. Likewise, investigators unfamiliar with the assumptions that shaped the original inquiry sometimes notice details overlooked by those working under the pressures of an active search. Revisiting evidence does not imply that earlier investigators failed. Instead, it reflects an understanding that every investigation is limited by the tools, knowledge, and available information of its own time. Looking again is not an admission of defeat. It is recognition that evidence deserves renewed attention whenever circumstances change. As imaging technology continues to improve, photographs once considered fully examined are repeatedly viewed through new tools capable of revealing details that earlier investigators could not easily detect. High-resolution scanning has restored clarity to aging negatives, while digital enhancement techniques make subtle differences in lighting and terrain easier to evaluate without altering the original evidence. Three-dimensional landscape modelling allows analysts to compare distant ridgelines with remarkable precision, and satellite imagery provides accurate representations of terrain that were unavailable to earlier generations of search teams. Artificial intelligence has also begun assisting researchers by identifying patterns, improving image quality, and organising enormous collections of photographs for systematic analysis. These technologies cannot create information that never existed, but they often help investigators recognise details previously hidden by poor image quality or technological limitations. Every improvement renews the possibility that an old photograph may still have something new to offer. Cases such as those of Chris Kremers and Lisanne Froon, Jerry Largay, David O'Sullivan, and Everett Roos continue drawing careful attention, because their final photographs still offer facts that remain open to interpretation without changing the evidence itself. The daytime photographs from the Pianista Trail continue serving as fixed points within the timeline of Chris and Lisanne's disappearance, while the nighttime images remain among the most analysed photographs in any wilderness investigation. Jerry Largay's photographs and written records preserve the confidence with which she began her journey, before becoming lost on the Appalachian Trail, reminding investigators how quickly familiar surroundings can become disorienting. David O'Sullivan's final images from the Pacific Crest Trail document a journey that ended without explanation despite extensive searches. Everett Roos's photographs remain valuable historical records not because they solve his disappearance, but because they preserve the landscapes that shaped his final travels through the desert. Although separated by decades, geography and circumstance, each case demonstrates the same enduring reality. Photographs often survive long after certainty has disappeared. Each new generation approaches these photographs carrying different knowledge, different technology, and different expectations, yet often arrives at the very same unanswered questions. Historians studying Everett Roos today possess access to archival collections and mapping resources unimaginable during the 1930s. Search specialists reviewing Jerry Largay's disappearance benefit from years of accumulated experience in wilderness survival and lost person behaviour. Digital investigators examining the photographs of Chris Creemers and Lisanne Froon employ software capable of enhancing details that earlier analysts struggled to evaluate. Despite these advances, the essential questions frequently remain unchanged. Where exactly was this photograph taken? What happened after it was captured? Could someone have survived longer than originally believed? The persistence of these questions reflects not a failure of investigation but the complexity of the wilderness itself, where evidence is often incomplete and time steadily erases what remains. Somewhere between hope and acceptance lies a place where many unresolved investigations remain for years, sustained by the possibility that one overlooked detail could still alter the understanding of an entire case. Investigators recognize this balance perhaps better than anyone. They cannot allow hope to replace evidence, yet neither can they dismiss new information simply because previous searches proved unsuccessful. Families face an even more difficult reality, carrying the emotional weight of uncertainty while waiting for answers that may never come. A single photograph often becomes the meeting point between those two perspectives. It provides something tangible that can still be studied, questioned, and revisited, even when every other trail has faded. That enduring presence explains why photographs retain such extraordinary emotional significance in missing person investigations long after the active search has ended. Remarkably, while opinions, theories, and investigative methods continue evolving over time, the photographs themselves remain exactly as they were on the day the shutter closed. They do not become clearer through repetition, nor do they change to accommodate new theories. Instead, it is the people examining them who change. Investigators accumulate experience. Technology becomes more sophisticated. Historians uncover forgotten documents. Search methods improve. Public understanding of wilderness survival expands. Every generation arrives carrying new knowledge, yet each confronts the same unchanging image captured years or even decades earlier. That remarkable contrast gives these photographs their enduring power. They exist outside the passage of time while continuing to influence every generation that studies them. Perhaps the lasting power of these images comes not from what they reveal, but from the quiet certainty that every viewer notices something different while searching for the same missing answer. They remind us that photographs are unlike almost any other form of evidence. They preserve an authentic moment that cannot be recreated, yet they leave countless surrounding moments forever undocumented. They encourage scientific analysis while inspiring deeply personal reflection. They provide facts while resisting complete explanation. Long after search operations conclude and headlines disappear, these images continue inviting careful observation, not because anyone expects certainty to emerge overnight, but because history has repeatedly shown that unanswered questions sometimes deserve another patient examination. In that sense, the photographs have never truly stopped participating in the investigations they began. The last photographs of missing hikers continue inviting each new generation to look a little closer, not because the images have changed, but because the questions surrounding them never truly have.